Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Good evening, everyone, and good morning if you're in Asia and wherever else. So this is our fourth evening. Friday's one, Saturday, fourth evening, so 3 full days. So as I always joke, if your meditations are really flowing along nicely, time's going very quickly. And if your meditations are miserable, it's eternity. So time is psychological as well as whatever. So there's several questions about real life and the suffering of real life, and how does these seemingly subtle things about silence and so on, how might they, where do they fit into the realities of aging parents and grandchildren who are struggling, and all the planet which is burning maybe. So real life is definitely problematic. I probably have it the easiest of anyone here. I've kind of built myself an old folks home in Perth. I have friends like Aiden looking out for me, so got a pretty good deal. But seriously, what I was just thinking, what am I trying to do in this kind of a retreat? And I guess I'm trying to share my own love of silence and love of meditation, and how enriching that is for me in a pragmatic way. But also that it's not simply an experience of silence, that it creates a platform for understanding all of that which is very noisy in our lives. And so what it creates is, first of all, a strengthening of the capacity to witness rather than react. That's hugely important, isn't it? If we're just reacting all the time, then there's no space. And witnessing does require witnessing. One aspect of witnessing is space. Like if I'm just in a really reactive mode, there's no space to contemplate how to act, or how I'm acting, or where I'm coming from, and what the consequences are of that. So I'm just a leaf in the wind, or just like a pinball in a pinball game. And that's suffering, definitely. So this kind of pause in one's life, a retreat, very valuable, obviously. But also I think, like, my encouragement to do really strong morning practice then sets up the possibility of really investigating the second and third noble truths, the cause of suffering and the end of suffering. Because much of life is just very unpleasant. Seeing my mom die, or seeing some of the news on TV and so on. So life is not necessarily all that pleasant. I think where I am is about, as good as it's ever going to get for any human being. I'm very terribly lucky. My parents are refugees. My brother was born in 1945. My mother carried him in the last year of the war in Germany as they were running from the Russians, and Latvia. So everyone has these kind of stories and things they live through, and so there's not just that. There's the histories that we have endured, maybe difficult histories that we've had in family life, and so on and so forth. So we need some kind of platform and distance to understand this. And a retreat such as this, where with really fine people, where we really feel safe, is a great gift. So hats off to OBS for creating the space for us, and the folk at Galilee. And once you have a sense, like once the witnessing consciousness is stronger, and you have a sense what space means in the mind, then when suffering comes up, when discontent comes up, you can get better and better at seeing the wanting. And so the wanting of something else, or the not wanting of what is. And that's the basic structure, I think, that one needs to constantly understand. Constantly. It's not just like, oh, I understood it once, but constantly, because because we're sensitive beings, we have emotions. I was thinking, like, a loom and weaving is pretty simple compared to the human psyche. So I can give a simplistic analogy of craft about the loom and weaving, but life is very complex. Emotions are very complex. But the thing about, I think, the Four Noble Truths, it tries to helps us with all the complexity of our personal lives to create something quite simple, and that's suffering and the end of suffering, and the cause of suffering being wanting, and the attachment to wanting. So that, for me, simplifies things. So there's all kinds of complex things one experiences, but when one can take it down to something more basic, and get really good at that, get really good at asking the right questions, thinking the right thoughts. So if someone asked about that little experience I spoke about, the sense of remorse in my heart, well, the remorse is a consequence of being heedless, the consequence of speaking in ways which were not grossly unkind, but for me, significant for the way I operate. And then the consequence comes up, the result comes up into my heart. And then through training, what I need to see is that I don't want this. I don't want this feeling. I don't want that history. I don't want to be like that. I don't want this now. And that wanting, if I'm not aware of it, makes me think in a wrong way, either through self-disparagement, whatever. So if however, I'm distancing myself from that, in a good way, I'm saying, what's the wanting here? That's hard to do because my mind just goes into the storyline so quickly, just grabs it. So that takes training. But if I can say, so what's the problem? What do I want that I have? Or what do I have that I don't want? It's my kind of mantra around wanting. What do I have that I don't want? What do I want that I don't have? So in the sense of the grief, I don't want this feeling, and I don't want that history. And then at least I say, oh yeah, but it is like this. So this encouragement, it's like this, it's like this, it's like this. It's a constant encouragement to actually, yeah, life is like this now. And what do I want? What do I want from it? Simple, it's simple to describe, but the heart's so complex, so very, very complex. One of the ways we talk about liberation is the unshakable deliverance of the heart. Beautiful line, isn't it? Unshakable deliverance of the heart. So in my case there, the heart is shaking because of a unskillful bit of speech. And then if I can be with that, say, no, this is karma, this is the result. This is the result. This is the result. This is the result. Feel it, feel it, feel it. Then I'm in the flow of Dhamma. This is how life works. It's not just my fault. I'm not wrong. It's just that, when you do this, you get that. With this, there is that. When there's not this, there's not that. And so I'm trying to get a perspective of Dharma rather than just my own personal failings. Then that's hard to do, isn't it? Because our personal failings, or our perceived failings, because that's usually the bigger problem, it's not really feelings, a perceived kind of thing can be so dominant. And so the wrong thinking is self-thinking, I-thinking, my-making, that kind of problem. So that's what we're trying to do in meditation, is get away from the I-making, my-making thinking to see the flow of Dharma as objects in awareness, but not in a disassociated way, in a feeling way. When we talk about letting go. It's a common misunderstanding. Letting go sometimes is misunderstood to mean that if you're feeling something, you're attached. That's not what we mean. Letting go is more like full feeling. You're fully feeling the results of life. Attachment would be the thinking around it. And so if I fully feel the remorse and then I put in Dharma language, this is the result. With this, there is that. Be careful. With this, there is that. So that's the result. That leads to more care and more compassion. Because I don't want to be alienated from people. I want to be close to people. We all do, don't we? Yet if I don't have some space and some strength of witnessing, then of course I just go into the habits of, in my case, self-hatred and self-disparagement, or in another person's case, justification. Yeah, they deserve it, or whatever it might be, depending on the programming of your mind. So hopefully this kind of a retreat creates that intuitive space, maybe, where you can understand those things. One of the questions came up was like feeling the suffering of someone very close to you, like a parent who is very ill or dying, or these kind of difficult, extreme things that we have. Well, what is, and the question was, well, what is equanimity? What do we mean by that? Peaceful coexistence of the way things are is how I would define equanimity. Peaceful coexistence of the way things are. Well, the way things are is not just my parents suffering or my loved ones suffering, it's all the way I am. It's both, it's not. It's both. So compassion is fully feeling the suffering of others, but peaceful coexistence is accepting that, well, they've got their lesson to learn. I can't live their life for them. I can't live their suffering for them. And that's hard to get, because why? Because my compassion goes to wanting. It takes a step more, wanting them not to suffer or be the way they are and cause themselves suffering. And that wanting is, as I think you all know, it's the sort of the downside of too much compassion, or compassion which is not really imbued with wisdom. And anyone who's been in a caring profession, whether you're a psychologist or a parent or whatever, we've all had that, haven't we? Where we don't, I'm talking with a monk or a nun, and I don't want them to suffer, and I get burnt out. I've had that where, I've listened to people and listened to their problems. Oh yeah, oh, that's tough. Yeah, oh God, how can I fix that? They're okay. At the end of the week, I'm burnt out. They're all right. Well, thanks. I've had that. I don't know about you. And that's because I'm so much wanting to fix their problem. It's easy with in that case. That's some humorous value with your parents, or with your kids, or with your grandkids. It's very loaded. It's very loaded, but it's the same kind of problem. So the capacity to kind of say to myself, it's like this. And then what am I creating on top of that with thought? And what can I actually do and what can I not do? So then other kind of Dharma language, well, all beings are the owners of their karma, heirs to their karma, born of their karma. Whatever karma they shall do for good or for ill, of that they will be the heir. That's a kind of good phrase to memorize in relationship to those, to anyone really, or someone very close to you. Because when you use that language, even though it might sound like parrot talk in the beginning, you do put yourself in line with the Buddhist teachings, as opposed to self-thinking, it's not fair, or what's going to happen to them, or, so that wrong thinking, if you train yourself with some phrases in Dharma, and you remember them, you can bring in the Dharmic phrases to get yourself kind of in tune with right thinking, samma sankappa, right thought. So like, just like your own, like, let's say, like this experience of grief, remorse is quite strong, but I've seen it many times. And then if I say this will change, You know, that's a very powerful thing to say to the heart, rather than "you idiot, Viradhammo," which is also a very powerful thing to say, but totally destructive and unkind and uncompassionate. It just leads to more of the same. But to actually have the presence of mind, say, yeah, this will change. The favorite line my mom had that I had given her in Buddhism, she says, if it comes, it will go. She loved that line. I thought, oh, good. All right. and these phrases they can sound trite, but they're not. They're not trite if they're used in a correct way, because they are used in a trite way in terms of, you know, the seasons change. You say, oh, it's all changing. That's trite. It's not profound. It's true, but it's, you know, it's just what we say. You know, it doesn't take a Buddha to kind of say that one. But to actually bring up these phrases of wisdom as a right thought in those situations where the mind is reactive is very, very skillful. So it's good to read them. It's good to read that, like to read the lines of "I am of the nature to die. I have not gone beyond dying. All beings are the nature to die. They have not gone beyond dying." That kind of Dharma reflection, you need to study it and memorize it. We memorize a lot of chanting. We memorize it the Pali and the English, and some of the lines can really hold your attention in a good way, in a very, very good way. So we have these chanting books. Flip through them. Look at some of the recollections that we have around Kamma or around Anicca Dukkha Anatta, whatever it is, and get a feeling for like what kind of language would help me in the particular situations where I get overwhelmed or upset. That can be very skillful. Thing is, in a monastery, I always forget that all around us there's Dharma, and all around us there's iconography, and our language is around Dharma and stupid jokes too, but that's okay. But you know, I sometimes forget that lay life is all around, is like all kinds of other language, all kinds of other imagery, all kinds of other unskillful stimulations. So bringing consciousness to ideas of Dhamma by, I think, not just like reading, but memorizing is good. I memorized all those lists way back. Now I can't remember them, but they're in there somewhere. They're in there somewhere. We had one situation, the previous visit of Luang Sumedo, and someone asked us from the audience, what does Sangvega, or something like one of those words, mean? They asked Luang Por. It's a very common word. And I don't know. Viradhammo, what do you think? I said, I don't know either. Yeah, we got to accumulate like 100 years of monasticism. So we had to ask a novice or something, what's it mean? So that was funny. But you know, the language of change, or the language of the language of dependent origination is very strong in my mind. With this, there is that. This being that is. And there's this, whereas not this, there's not that. This, that, we call that this, that conditionality, paticca samuppada, dependent origination. Is very strong in my mind as a kind of background voice, I would say, or a perspective on the way things are. That Lajan Chas, it's an uncertain, meine. So I just heard that so often, meine, it's uncertain, it's uncertain. Again, you can use that in a trite way. Oh, life is uncertain. Yeah, but get some insurance. But you can also use it in a powerful way when you have a perception of someone that they're this or that. You say uncertain. That has a lot of power in it, because that challenges your sense of certainty around your viewpoint. A lot of people who attach to views, they don't get it. You know, they really like all this kind of conspiracy theories and all that kind of stuff. You can see like even in Sangha sometimes, these kind of strong views around Buddhism or what's right and what's wrong. Not that one can't have views, but this like holding to views. Ajahn Chah would say it's uncertain. It was so helpful. Always kind of broke up the conceit of views. Dittupadana, we call it. So the language that you hear, you write stuff down, memorize it, and you try to introduce it into the complexity of your life. So let's say, yeah, like with my mom, I would suffer because I had tremendous compassion and love for her, but I hadn't really understood upekkha, equanimity, in my relation to her dying. Now, obviously, I don't want her to suffer or have pain. And then I just watch, what is it? Oh, you want her not to have pain, but she has to have pain. She's dying, or whatever she has to go through. And that was an important insight. It was very important, not just in the dying, but even like a few years before that. No, she's got osteoporosis. She's got her meds, and you can't do it. Oh yeah, mom has to suffer pain. It's like this, and that's compassionate, not dismissive, but is also peaceful. And coming to that took a bit of pondering. What's going on here? You're worried about her pain. She's worried about you worrying about her pain. There's something, come on, guys. But okay, what's the problem? So there's that contemplative mind is always questioning in a good way. And saying, oh, yeah. She is the owner of her karma. I have my karma. She has her karma. Yeah, and I knew that. Obviously, I read it 1,000,001 times. But in this situation, I didn't know that. I was the dutiful son who was worrying about his mother, which I didn't throw compassion away. I was still working, but that was a good insight. It was a peaceful insight. And often it's the way, isn't it, where you've read the Dharma, you've seen it, and you've understood it in some ways, but there's some bits of your life you're not understanding, and you're suffering, and that suffering is calling to you. What is the cause? It's like what's the cause? It's a cause. Well, because life is this way. That's the cause of suffering. That's the cause of the discomfort. Yeah, but it is this way. What's the cause? And you keep going back to the root teaching. The cause is attachment to tanha, craving. Oh, okay. Where's that? Where's that in my mind? Oh, and the liberation is the letting go of craving. So if people say, when people think that letting go means having some kind of non-emotional relationship to life, that's not right, because we have emotions. So when you see that not wanting the anger, not wanting the pettiness, and hanging on to that becomes the problem. So if I feel really irritated at someone, the irritation has arisen. It's causally related to conditioning in this being. And I'm careful with speech, but I have to then witness in silence to this unpleasant feeling. And if I've trained in that, I can say to myself, wow, this is really crappy. And this is what crappy feels like. I don't like this. And this is what don't like feels like. You keep coming back to that until it runs its course. Or you say, this is going to change. Just hang in there. This will change. So you have a kind of coaching language rather than a doctrinal language. Doctrinal language is you're attached, shouldn't be attached. 50 years a monk, shouldn't be attached. Thank you. That helped a lot. I had that once where I was having a difficult time handling a difficult monk. And one of the junior monks said, you're not handling it very well. Well, thanks. Thanks a lot. Thanks for your support. You want to get out with him? You gotta like, people do that. Whereas awakening to the way things are is non-attachment. That's what non-attachment means. So ironically, non-grasping means full feeling, but not indulging in that feeling. It's like fully witnessing from that place of witnessing, where indulging would be somehow just getting lost in it and wallowing in it and thinking it and not seeing it as a khandha, as an object in awareness. And how that works, each of us has to kind of figure it out for ourselves. But to me, the secret seems to be right thinking. Because if I've got Dharma language, if I'm saying, be careful, or what's this really feel like, or come on, let's have more, or whatever you want, it has to fit your particular conditioning, your habits. This is why developing a language of Dharma for yourself is so very, very important. So the language I develop is for myself. So I share that with you, but obviously it's not going to fit all occasions for all people. But that means you use the concepts help you to develop a kind of self-coaching. That's what I think the language, Samma Sankappa, it's a self-coaching and a self-encouragement according to Dharma, right? According to Dharma. And then thought becomes obviously very helpful, very, very helpful. So it's not no thought, very, very helpful. So reading, study, these kinds of things are helpful in that way. And as I said, memorizing some of these, like the Metta Sutta, this one that we do. I mean, that's really a beautiful sutta. And as you know, I like to sometimes just say it to myself slowly. That's beautiful focus. And the intentions of that sutta, this is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright. You can kind of lay it out for yourself, and that echoes through your mind in ways which then will affect your perceptions of life and yourself. Or all beings are the owners of the Kamma, born of their Kamma, whatever. And you lay that out very slowly and carefully. That echoes through the mind in a very good way. The Brahma Viharas chant, that's a great one for the shower, by the way. You can do Pavarotti with those. Exalted. I have my own shower. It's great, isn't it? It's a beautiful chant. I'm just thinking what other questions. There was one question about habits of cynicism. How do you break habits like that? I think that was here actually. As we age, our view can become darker, more cynical. How do we find energy and curiosity? It is so easy to fall into patterns and habits that keep us in the foreground. Yeah. Well, I'm lucky because I have community. And if any of us kind of gets into a really negative space, we allow that because that's the way you learn. But it's hard to really indulge in it when you've got a brown robe running around in front of you. There's something about other samanas and people who are practicing where to really, really believe in the moon in egotistical ways, actually probably you have to be very stubborn to do that. So you have reflections of Dharma all around. If you're living on your own, it's not the case because you have all kinds of media, which can be very, very negative. And then you have your own mind, which if it doesn't have Dharma stimulation, can just spin into wrong thinking. What to do? Well, somehow move the mind away from wrong thinking. The trouble with cynicism is it can be very conceited. Cynical people can be very, very proud of their cleverness at how terrible the world is. And that is kind of, yeah, sure, you're right, but where's your mind going to? And that kind of conceit can be quite crippling in that way. So if it's happening to someone in your family, that's hard. If it's happening to yourself, then the Brahma Viharas chants, the practices of metta, all thing like memorizing suttas. This is very, very good. memorize the Dhammacakka Sutta. It takes a lot of work. You know, we're not trained in memorizing things. We have all kinds of computers and things, but say, like memorizing just memorizing the discourse on loving kindness. To actually memorize it, to sit down, requires a mind which is not cynical. It has to be focused. And then you do the work of that, and then you start to, as the mind goes into cynicism, you try to replace it with, this is what should be done. And then you're challenged by the habit of cynicism, say. So it's not just meditation, it's skillful. Again, that goes to thinking again, doesn't it? Obviously, if I'm just looking at the negative world news, then I'm bound to be cynical. What else is left? So guarding the mind from those kinds of inputs. If I haven't lived a very skillful life, if my life has been shoddy, if I've been unkind to people, then I'm going to have to live with the results of that, which is hard to live with maybe. So have memory. But then if I can just say, okay, this is memory, but may I be free from suffering? Yeah, I'm sorry, but may I be free from suffering? Is right thinking. Again, it's right thinking. Cynical thinking, judgmental thinking, self-disparagement thinking, that's just bad habit. And to break those habits, you just have to somehow learn to think in other ways. And I suppose psychologists teach that a lot, cognitive therapies and things like that. I'm not familiar with that. So I've always learned just by using the phrases from the texts and repeating them and bringing them up into my mind. If you're like, if your heart becomes sensitive, then cynicism directed at others becomes cruel, has a sense of cruelty in it. It can be hurtful. Then if you're sensitive, you'll see, no. If you have no sensitivity, then you live very much alone, So developing a loving kindness practice is very, very important. How you do that with people who are cynical and won't want to develop it, I don't think you can. Someone who's older who wants to be cynical, they're going to want to be cynical, I suppose. I think the best example I had was the one I always give of a man who had been thrown out of work at the age of 50, had worked hard for the organization he worked for, and not a word of thanks, just chuck him out. And boy, was he cynical. Ooh, was he cynical. Wow. So I'm trying to kind of work some kind of meta magic with him. And we couldn't find any, I mean, you've heard the story, but anyway, I couldn't find anything that he had a loving feeling towards. Certainly not his wife, not his kids, not his, it's like everything was negative. I thought, this guy's stunning. And then I found out that he works for the RSPCA. He loved dogs and cats. So we did dogs and cats. So I said, I could bring up into your mind one of the dogs or cats that you have affection for. And right away, he could feel affection. So the cynicism was now replaced. And I said, now you keep thinking of that puppy or that cat. Watch cat videos. There were no cat videos. This was 40 years ago. But I could do that now, couldn't I? But then so I saw, okay, there's a bit of light in the darkness. And that's what we're trying to do, is bring light up. But you have to do it because these habits are very, very strong. So I certainly have suffered a lot from cynicism. I think that's the way I avoided I'm not sure, but it's probably the way I dealt with fear. I think, kind of the way, dealt with like social fears I had. I thought I'd be a smart ass guy with clever ideas and cynical ideas, which is pretty a lot of suffering. Not very, very nice. I wasn't all bad, honest. But I think maybe that's part of it, and also the culture and so on. So then later in life, when you have these habits, they're very strong. They're the kind of reactive habits, so they take a while to work on. But as the heart touches silence, as the heart feels the beauty of compassion, these things become unacceptable. You just don't want to go there. You don't want to go there. Too painful. So here's the thing. I've got to skip out. And I'm going to leave Aiden in charge for one night. Honest, I'll come back. I promise. You should see his face, smile underneath. Okay, there you go. So we're going to scoot out to the monastery, need to. And Jean's from the West Coast, and she hasn't seen the monastery, so we'll go show her the monastery. I'll be back tomorrow for lunch. I promise. All being well. And then we'll continue. Yeah. So Aiden will run the meeting tomorrow morning. And then I'll be back for lunch. Yeah. So let's finish with the Buddha's words on loving kindness. Oops, there you go. Yes, sir. Go for it. And the Buddha's words on loving kindness, wherever that page is. All right. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties, and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud and demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove, wishing in gladness and in safety. May all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another, even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child. So with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, freed from drowsiness. One should sustain this recollection, abiding by not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. And the closing homage. How was our reception in the internet? It's pretty good. No complaints. Okay, good. do the closing homage. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Bhutang Bhagavantang Abhivademi Sawakatua Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipannuva Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sangkang Namami. All right, everyone. We'll see you when we see you.